So, in case no one told you, your advocacy at the UN is not working because you are running the same playbook as pretty much everyone else. In the past 20 years, I have negotiated over 100 UN decisions, hundreds of UN decisions, by the way, across the Human Rights Council, the Climate Convention, so that is UNFCCC, the Ocean Treaty, or the BBNJ, General Assembly, WHO. So, in this podcast, I'm going to talk to you about how you can stop wasting your time delivering interventions that get filed and forgotten, and how you can use the 4 questions I use usually to actually affect outcomes inside many of these negotiating rooms. And thirdly, how you and I together can push for the one thing that could rewire indigenous rights at the highest level of international law in our lifetime.
This is the Go Maluku podcast.
On this podcast, I want to talk to you about noticing some lies. Lies that a lot of indigenous leaders believe. Lies that keep us comfortable. Lies that keep us busy while the world moves on without us. So, I'm going to name 5 of them in this podcast, and I'm going to tell you why they're lies, and I'm going to tell you what to do instead. But before any of that, I want us to start from the same place. Because when I say words like diplomacy and power, I honestly think that a lot of people in our movement have been trained or domesticated in a way to hear something totally different from what I actually mean. So here's my definition, and I really want you to hear this. Diplomacy by itself is not talking. It is not the speech. It is not the intervention. It is not the moment where they hand you the microphone. Diplomacy is attaching yourself to the right process long enough to affect the outcome. That's it. Now, there's also good diplomacy. Good diplomacy is knowing where the decisions actually move and showing up to that place so often that people begin to listen to you or take your views into account. They stop planning around you. They start planning with you because they know that you will not go away, and also that you bring some darn good advice. And then there's power. And let me tell you what power actually is from my perspective. Power is when your presence changes what other people think they actually can get away with. And that is the funny thing. It's not only just like that they will listen to you, but also like they know like, well, yes, we can try this, but we won't get away with it because Ghazali will call us out, or we'll see this, or something along those lines. And that is it. That is the beautiful thing about having power in these negotiations, at least from a Indigenous Peoples perspective, or like power is different for member states, but as we engage in these negotiations, this is actually real power, or part of it. So that is the whole thing. Now let me show you what I mean. For example, Pacific Island nations and the climate advisory opinion. So if we go back a little bit in history, and like recent history, I think it was like 2020 to 23, a group of Pacific students sat down with a simple idea: take the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court, the International Court of Justice. And here's the thing: they used a system where the big polluters run everything. Look at the UNFCCC. Like there's a unprecedented amount of corporate lobbyists, every cop. And the funny thing is, they start going into these meetings, or start to leverage that and build an entire movement around it. And nobody was asking them what they thought. Nobody was waiting for their legal theory, but they kept pushing. They kept pushing that one idea over and over every chance they got. Every time. World's biggest problem has to go to the world's highest court. And this is not like a generational thing, but 3 years later, just 3 years, every government on the planet now has to respond to what the court said about climate change and human rights. And this is a very good lesson, at least the lesson that I choose out of many, but for this podcast, choose to pick out is that they picked one thing, they stuck with it, and they won. And I picked this because I have done smaller versions of this myself. Same playbook, but different arenas. For example, BB&J, Ocean Treaty, I worked on getting Indigenous peoples' rights and knowledge into the text. And at the time of recording this podcast, we are post PrepCom 3, and we came out with a document that now says a separate observer status for Indigenous peoples, a special fund seat for Indigenous peoples, and potentially a voluntary fund for Indigenous peoples, as well as an MRIP/Human Rights Advisory Committee style entity within the BB&J architecture that supplements the work of all the subsidiary bodies, as well as COP, that I usually refer to as the Indigenous Advisory Mechanism. And then there's Article 6 on human bringing in, also not on human rights, but Article 6 on carbon markets, bringing in human rights, a sustainable development tool that project developers have to fill out, that includes like how free power from consent and how they went about getting it. And then also including an appeals and grievance mechanism in this whole architecture of the carbon market, with the fees waived for Indigenous peoples. And then, I don't want to be like too much tooting my own horn here, but like at the UMS Council, working on enhanced participation of Indigenous peoples, we have a placard for Indigenous peoples, which is also accompanied with a separate registration category. And now we no longer need to register as ECOSOC NGOs for certain sessions of the Human Rights Council. And those are real outcomes: language and treaties, procedural changes, and not speeches that get fouled and forgotten. And then there's also something that we are all aware of, the Declaration. And that was like generation before me, like my mom's generation and everyone else that was part of it. That generation pushed the Declaration process for several decades. Self-determination, free power from consent, over and over. And eventually the world started connecting Indigenous peoples with human rights, going from consideration of Indigenous rights to commitments to the rights of Indigenous peoples. Not just culture, not just heritage, not just songs and dances. Rights. And that is not because they showed up, like just for the fun of it. They showed up every year for several decades. And I think that is why it worked. So if diplomacy and power are what I just said they are, then let me ask you something. Is there a world where you could be showing up to the wrong thing? Not all participation is good participation. And I want you to write that down. Sometimes more visibility on the wrong thing can actually hurt you. Figure out what you want to be known for. Figure out what you want to work for, but also figure out what you do not want to be associated with. Figure out what you not want to be a product of your work. Both matter, and both are part of the same game. And that's why I want to explain or unpack or debunk the 5 lies that I keep hearing. So line number 1, if I just keep delivering interventions, states will eventually listen. And I hear this all the time, literally all the time. And I get it. Persistence is good. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you persistence is bad. Nobody's going to tell you that. But here's what I actually see happening. A lot of you have been doing this for 10 years, and after 10 years, you cannot tell me if it's working. You cannot even tell me, for example, what working would look like. So if I sat you down right now in Vienna Cafe or a Zoom call and said, how will you know if this year was a success? It would be a problem if you would not have an answer to that. It would be a huge problem. The thing is that you do not have a goal. You're actually just showing up. In every UN session, whether it is focused on indigenous peoples or not, same thing happens. You deliver your intervention, you talk about land theft, free powerful consent violations, self-determination, same recommendations you gave last year, same spiel that you gave last year and the year before that. You turn off your microphone, session ends, report gets filed, your recommendation might get in or might even not get in. Next year you come back, say the same stuff. My friends, that is not building power. That is a diplomatic treadmill. And here's the other thing also that I want you to understand. We are all, whether we like it or not, building a reputation in the US system. Whether we think about it or not, whether we want it or not, whether we're trying to or not. And some of us are building it on purpose. But most of us are letting states decide what we are known for. For me, I would rather decide for myself. So how do you actually do that? How do you go from just showing up to actually affecting outcomes? And here is you probably want to grab a pen and paper for this, a 4-step influence plan, because I don't want to overcomplicate the participation of indigenous peoples at the international level. And if you've been listening to several of my briefings on Substack, or my daily briefings, you know that I love reverse engineering because that's the easiest thing to do. You start with the end and then work backwards. So these are the 4 questions. Again, reverse engineering. Question 1, what is the outcome that I want? Question 2, what is the process that delivers that outcome? Question 3, who are the decision makers inside that process? And then question 4, what would actually move them? Specific questions, one leading into the other. Let me walk you through 2 examples, one small and one big, but applying the same 4 questions within the same framework. So let's say at the time of recording this, we're like days before the permanent forum on indigenous issues starts. Let's say you want a recommendation in the permanent forum report, something about traditional knowledge or land rights in your region. Question 1, what is the outcome that I want? I want a recommendation calling for X in the permanent forum report. Now, the thing is, this is where most people stop. And that is why I am recording this podcast. They have a vague idea of what they want. But the thing is, vague does not work. Within the UN system, vague is the enemy. Vague is how you show up for 10 years and have nothing at the end of it. You have to be specific. A recommendation in the report at this session about this specific thing, name it, write it down, be willing to say it out loud in 1 sentence. Once you are specific, now you can ask the next question. What is the process that delivers that outcome? The report gets drafted by the members. Each member has their own portfolio or section of the report. Pen holders, there's a bureau and a secretariat, but they all write it based on what people say during the session. And what I also have to say, what the expert members push for. If multiple delegations of indigenous people say the same thing and expert members may back it on the floor or in their internal negotiations amongst expert members, then it is more likely to get in. Now you actually start to understand how a report of the permanent forum gets written. And that also tells you who you need to talk to, which brings us to question number 3. Who are the decision makers? Now, most people deliver their intervention and hope the right person heard it. Hope. And like I said before, many times hope is not a strategy. And by now, you know exactly who the right people are. And by now, you can also know that you can go actually directly to them. You can buy them coffee. You can brief them. You can follow up. Which brings me to question number 4. What would move them? The thing is, and I've been working not several times, but every session of the Primitive Forum, I work with expert members. What do they want to include in the report? And many members want just clear language they can actually use, copy and paste language. They want to see delegates, indigenous delegates primarily from different regions, all asking for somewhat the same thing. It's helpful if you brief them beforehand so they are not caught off guard in the middle of a drafting session. And from a secretarial perspective, they want a language that fits the format and does not cause them problems later on, which includes, for example, a maximum word count. Believe me, I have had to several times, and I think like not last year, but a year before that, working with expert members on a recommendation on enhanced participation, and they said, well, like, and I gave them language, and we like went back and forth, and then like they heard, well, this needs to be trimmed down to like 200 words. I'm like, oh my god, we're at 500. So then you start like strip down language, making sure that you still cover like the basics. And that is like some of these factors that the expert members have to deal with. But that is actually the part that everyone skips. Like literally everyone. They think about what they want. They do not think about what would make the decision maker say yes. So let me say that again because it is important. People think about what they want. They do not think about what would make the decision maker say yes. So now I know what to do. I write specific language before the session. I share with delegates from other regions and ask them to say the same thing. I meet with expert members, WhatsApp, or like have a coffee with them and tell them why this matters. And I follow up during the session so it does not get lost in the noise. And like I said, like each question, that's what reverse engineering entails. Each question feeds the next. Outcome tells you process tells you people tells you what moves them, and what moves them tells you exactly what to do. Now, this is like the version that you can apply within the primitive forum. The same process actually can work at any level. So, for example, ICJ advisory opinion, and let me like walk you through it fast. What's the outcome that I want? I want the ICJ to issue an advisory opinion on what states have to do to implement indigenous rights, self-determination, ethnic, and land rights. What's the process that delivers that outcome? So that's question number 2. The ICJ only issues advisory opinions if the General Assembly asks. Okay. Well, that will mean that the states have to draft a resolution. That resolution might go through a committee, and states will negotiate the text. The General Assembly votes. If it passes, the question goes to the court. Question 3, decision makers. The champion states who draft and lead the resolution, the state delegations who will vote, the committee chairs maybe, and indirectly indigenous peoples, their organizations, as well as civil society who create the political environment that lets states act in the first place. Question 4, what would move them? The thing is, states champion things when they see political benefit. They do not champion things for free. They move when they see a coalition already forming. Because then it becomes safer to join than to stay out. They support something when they have been briefed early and feel ownership over it. And I've seen this many times before. And also they respond when they see indigenous peoples from multiple regions unified behind one clear ask. It does not mean, by the way, and let me just go off script here. This does not mean that you need to have like a coordination entity or whatever. It is better to have indigenous peoples like rally around like a specific task or a specific idea than trying to have it all like institutionalized in a steering committee or something along those lines. Now I know what to do. I find states that might champion this, talk about it early, build visual or visible indigenous support across regions, draft language that states actually use, copy and paste language, build relationships with the missions in Geneva as well as in New York. And that is how you go from today to where you want to be. Maybe pause the video if you have to, or the podcast if you have to, and answer the first question for yourself. What's the outcome that you want? And I will tell you mine going into the Plymouth Forum this year. I want indigenous peoples to have legal clarity on our rights at the highest level of international law. Which brings me into like line number 2. The UN mechanisms we have are enough. The UN created spaces. It created mandates. And indigenous peoples worked very hard, actually, to create these mandates as well as these mechanisms. The 3 specific mechanisms working on the rights of indigenous peoples. So that's a Perm Forum on indigenous issues, the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples, as well as a special rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples. Real people, real indigenous peoples fought for decades to create those. My mom's generation among them. You and I would not be doing this work if they had not done that work. Here's what I keep seeing. People working really, really, really hard inside spaces that were literally designed to let us talk without actually changing anything. Burn Forum makes recommendations, but it cannot make law. Expert mechanism does studies, but it cannot make member states do anything. Special rapporteur writes reports, but many states ignore them. You have access, but you do not have influence. You have a seat, but you do not have a vote. So unfortunately, it's like the theater of inclusion. You are invited to perform, but you're not invited to decide. And that difference matters. It matters a lot. But here's the thing though. States love to say that the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is aspirational. That has like nice words, beautiful words, but no teeth. And let me go off script for in here again. When states say that the declaration is aspirational, I would argue, and you might want to argue is as well, then say that if the declaration is aspirational, then you should aspire to implement it. But as long as the framing of the declaration as like having no teeth, as long as that framing stands, every recommendation we ever make can be ignored. And it's being ignored right now as I'm recording this podcast. So if that is the trap, then what is the fix? Now, here's the fix. There are many mechanisms out there. We're utilizing them, the 3 main ones. But there's one mechanism that can actually change that framing forever. And I kind of alluded to it earlier on, which is the International Court of Justice. Now, most people in the movement have, before the Climate Change and Human Rights ICJ AO, have like heard it in passing, but very few people actually understand what it does. And I'm being honest, I was one of those people for a very long time. So I've been having like, with all these frustrations about implementation of the rights of indigenous peoples and like continually hitting that ceiling, not at the international level, but definitely on the local level. I was really like starting to read into it, look into it. And that is why this whole ICJ idea came up like 2.5 years ago. It's the main court of the UN. Sits in The Hague, has 15 judges, and actually yesterday, at the time of recording this podcast, it was celebrating its 80th inaugural, the 80th anniversary of its inaugural meeting. 15 judges, and it does actually 2 things. 1, it settles disputes between states, country versus country kind of stuff. But 2, and this is the one that matters for us, it can issue, or issues actually, advisory opinions. An advisory opinion is when a General Assembly or the Security Council asks the court a legal question, like, what does international law actually say about yada yada yada? The court studies it, hears arguments, and then issues an opinion. Now, technically, advisory opinions are not binding. And if you look at like the conversation post the ICJ-AO on climate change and human rights, states love to point that out. They love it. They will say to you at a coffee break with a little smile, or in negotiations, they will tell you, but the ICJ-AO is not binding though. But here's what they do not tell you. Every state has to respond. Every court in every country has the opportunity to consider it. And also, the legal landscape shifts. And that, for us, for these peoples, when it comes to the rights of these peoples, that is not nothing. That is actually everything. So when in 2023, the GA, so the General Assembly, asked the ICJ for an advisory opinion on climate change, on what are states' legal obligations to protect the climate system, it was not Canada, not the Nordics. It was Vanuatu that led this. Let me say that again. Vanuatu. Population under 500,000, but super indigenous, no Security Council seat. But the beauty of it is they built a coalition. They built a coalition and said one thing: everyone has a place in that coalition. They drafted the resolution and they got it through. Now, obviously there's more underneath the hood than I'm explaining right now. But if I were to explain everything like in hyper detail, then this would be like a 5-hour long podcast. And I want to spare you the 5-hour long podcast for now. But the main important thing is that they got the resolution through by consensus. Nobody voted against it. So that was, not only did they draft a resolution, but they actually like did this whole like diplomatic dance, this whole like shepherding of member states by getting this resolution passed by consensus. Now, every government on the planet has to respond now to what the court says about their climate obligations. Having listened to all this, let me ask you, if it worked for climate, wouldn't it work for the rights of Indigenous peoples? Same court, same process, same tools, but a different question. And the question that I've been like scribbling down for, I've been scribbling down actually, but it's one question that I've scribbled down like a year and a half ago, and I keep like going back to it. It can be the main question, but it all depends on like the member states, whoever is going to lead the coalition, how to and also with like some top legal advice about refining or changing or adding on to this question. So the question that I think that we should be asking is, what are states' legal obligations to implement the rights of Indigenous peoples, in particular Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, self-determination, free from consent, and land rights? I think that something along those lines is a question that we should be asking. Now, when it comes to teeth to the declaration, like I said, the declaration does not have any teeth, which brings me to lie number 3. And you'll probably hear this in quarter conversations, that we need a treaty or a convention on Indigenous rights. And what this means is that some people say that we should push for a binding treaty convention. I get the appeal. I understand it. Convention's binding, declaration is not. But let me tell you why. And I don't want to debunk the whole idea, but let me tell you why this is the wrong move right now. Right now, this moment. Because a convention means or could imply or could open the door for renegotiating our rights. Now, in 2026, with this UN, with these states in this political environment, I don't want to say like, are you serious? But you do not want to sit down and renegotiate self-determination with countries that are actually trying to dilute it whilst I'm speaking. So the conversation about a convention is not protection, or like the negotiating for a convention is not protection, but it's actually exposure. And also, quickly, like the track record. If you look at, for example, ILO Convention 169, the only binding instrument we have on indigenous rights was adopted in 1989, 24 ratifications out of 193 UN member states. So I don't know the percentage of that, 24 out of 193, but you have ChatGPT or whatever, you can figure that out. But in 35 years, less than what, 20% of countries signed up to it or like ratified it. And the thing is, like, if you go through the list of 24 countries, the countries that did sign mostly already had decent protections for tribal communities or indigenous communities back then. They already had those back then. And then the ones where things are the worst, where our people are actually dying, where our people are actually being killed for standing up for the rights of Indigenous peoples, and dare to say, like, that's not like the global north, it's mostly the global south, they are not signing. And most likely they are not ever going to sign it. So a convention that major violators will not ratify is not protection. It is, dare I say, a participation trophy. Now, what is the alternative to that? And like, I don't want to make it sound like all roads lead to an ICJ advisory opinion, but then again, like, this is my podcast and this is what I'm recording it for you. And the ICJ advisory opinion does not require ratification. So that is helpful. It interprets existing international law, the human rights covenants, customary international law, the declaration. If you, I would argue that's can be part of the interpretation syllabus or the sources, and it clarifies what states are already supposed to be doing, as the declaration includes rights that indigenous people should have had all along. So, no new negotiations, no watering down, and no waiting for ratifications that might never come. Every state has to respond, every single one, whether they will ratify anything or not. And here's the other thing: the negotiation for a convention, it takes a decade minimum, probably even more. An ICJ advisory opinion, if you look at the climate one, it went from resolution to proceedings in what, less than 4 years. And that is, for us, glacial speed, absolutely. But for like UN standards, it's fast. Not super fast, but it doesn't take a generation either. So the thing is, like, what I'm trying to say is that ICJ is better in comparison to a potential treaty. It's not like, but like binding versus not binding. I think that is the wrong frame that we're talking about. And it's not what we should be arguing. This is mainly risk versus security. Negotiations around a convention or a treaty puts our rights back on the negotiating table, whether we like it or not, whether we get the so-called assurance that it will not reopen the declaration. But an ICJ opinion takes what we already have and what is already out there, and mainly what we have, and can give it teeth. So if you like have to like toss between or choose between the two, I know what I'm choosing, and that's why I'm thinking about like this ICJ advisory opinion track. Now, there's another lie that which I want to unpack, which is lie number 4. Lie number 4 is the declaration is enough. We just need better implementation. And I've heard this one a lot. Um, Unfortunately, I've heard this a lot by people that are from the previous generation that actually are gassed out. That is like, well, like it's enough. Like I don't want to like gear up for a fight anymore, or want to go into war anymore. And obviously, yes, we want implementation, and I think myself, nobody is against implementation, and that is not what I'm arguing. But again, if you actually go to what's happening on the ground, because we should not be looking at the international level in a vacuum or in an isolated way. Um, what is happening is that states are not implementing because no court has clarified what it requires. So, for example, and I'll do a little mix about, no, let me start with the international level. Every year, and this is unfortunate, but this is if people that have been like tracking my daily briefs on Substack um, have heard this or have seen this pattern, where unpack the pattern, by the way, that every year the language around indigenous rights gets weaker. Every year, the appetite for states to, like to advance the rights of indigenous peoples gets weaker, gets less every single year. For example, FPIC used to be a right? Now it gets treated as a principle. We have to actually go into negotiations to say like, no. FPIC is not a principle; it's a right. And they say like and they treat it as a process, something to be balanced against other interests, as if our consent is something you weigh on a scale. And then also like, and let me go again off script here, is that like they're fine with including FPIC, but they are what they conveniently leave out is that FPIC is part of like a whole like ensemble suite of rights under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. FPIC is just one right, but like the declaration has 46 rights, 46 paragraphs, articles. And then again, Article 46 is not like our most like favorite one, but like FPIC should not be like singled out as a standalone. It should be read into like a broader context of the entire declaration. Brings me into self-determination. And self-determination at the time of creation of the UN Charter and the decolonization of the African continent, it used to mean what it means. But now it gets shrunk into cultural autonomy, into local decision making, into anything that does not threaten state sovereignty or political unity, yada yada yada, which is basically Article 46.2. Anything that does not make anyone uncomfortable. The other thing is that indigenous peoples, and you heard me say it over and over, get conflated with stakeholders, with civil society, with, amongst others, local communities, with interested parties. Like we are just another NGO constituency in the room. And this is happening right now in real negotiations. I don't want to say like I watch it happen. I fight hard against it. But I also see like I do the numbers. And diplomacy or negotiation is, in many cases, a numbers game. And it doesn't matter how hard I push back. And I guess some member states to support it. When I do the numbers, like, oh shoot, yeah, like this is not going to stand. This is not going to hold. I experienced this with my own eyes. And I sit in those rooms while someone changes rights to interests, and I'm trying to correct it. But at the very end, there's a chance that it actually goes in. And then like on the local level, I have again like side conversation here, a little bit off script. I have a friend in the private sector. He was in the movement for a very long time, transitioned into the private sector. He sent me a text a while ago. He told me about like a well-known figure within the indigenous movement, was consulting and what they call epic compliance. And he sat in this meeting with this consultant, and their whole business model is helping companies, quote unquote, check the epic box without actually changing anything. Like show up, hold a meeting, document that you consulted, move on. And that is what I mean with implementation that look without clarity, or implementation, what implementation looks like without clarity. So this is happening right now, and I'm sure that while you're listening to this, that like you have some flashbacks to some conversation you had, or with your tribal government, with your community, on anyone else. This is happening right now while you're listening to this or watching this, or however you're consuming this. And it's happening because there is a minimum standard, yes, but there's no baseline. There's nothing anyone can point to that says this is what that right requires. This is the baseline. We already have the minimum standard. That's clear. But there's no baseline. This is the minimum, and this is not negotiable. And I believe, and having listened to like members of the International Law Committee and several other like experts in international law, they'll claim that an ICJ advisory opinion would create that baseline for Indigenous peoples. Now, same argument. Like we already have the mechanisms, or we don't just need implementation. Some of you might be thinking, all right, cool. Let me take a sip of water. Ghazali, just pause here because there are other things to do. Let's wait. Let a better political moment come, because we are already working on, like, I don't know, something cool. Now let me give you a different perspective, or another perspective on that. We're in 2026 right now, and 2027 next year will be the 20th anniversary of the Declaration. Now think about what happens after that. There's no talk about a 25th anniversary mechanism. There's no talk about not a review of the Declaration, but review of implementation of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples document, all that stuff. That's not happening. Going off script again. What you also should be aware of is that there were some voices, or not some voices, a voice within the Indigenous movement that was advising against a, like a follow up, or a commemoration of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples outcome document, like a review conference, something like that, or implementation conference, something along those lines. So it's likely, unlikely actually, that something like that will happen. So between now and, let's say, the 30th anniversary, there's nothing too significant like that we can work towards. Nothing. Now you can say, well, Ghazali, I hear you. However, if I've anything that I've learned within the Indigenous movement is that everything is negotiable. Like, fair enough. And yeah, we might get a chance in 5 years. Let's do this in 5 years, or in 10 years. Okay, cool. If that is your argument, and I know, like, if we are going to have that argument, then please beware, you're not going to win it. Because there's also something about climate. And in 10 years, things could look fundamentally different. So, for example, with this whole UN80 initiative, do you know what 10 years is in this system? It is everything. Like I said, the appetite for indigenous issues is going down. UN mechanisms are under threats. Budgets are getting cut. It's called a budget liquidity crisis. No, it's not. It's a protection crisis. It's a political issue. The whole UN80 thing that is happening right now, who knows what the UN even will look like in, I don't know, 2030, let alone 2034. And that is at the international level. look at the local level or like the on the ground, particularly in the global south. Lands are being taken faster than ever. Faster, not slower, faster. I had a phone call with my traditional council the other day about like getting instructions. From time to time, I seek new instructions from my traditional council, and they said clearly, Ghazali, like participation, because we talk about enhanced participation. Participation is nice, but like our lands are being cleared right now. What we need is protection. So I don't know what you're doing, but here's your new instruction: go find something that provides protection. And in my view, an ICJ advisory opinion is protection. So, and people will probably say that, like, well, no, Ghazali, like, enhanced participation is part of the protection. Like, yeah, but the thing is, like, that is not what my traditional elders and leaders and council will be okay with. They want real protection because our real lands, and we're talking about lots of it, are being taken away, are being contaminated. Illegal logging is happening on a daily basis. People are getting killed. Like the moment that you start talking about, like, yeah, land rights or something along those lines, or human rights violations, or even a national aspiration for regaining our independence, you're met with a bullet between your ears, a bullet in your head. And ICJ advisory opinion is therefore what I would argue is put out of protection. It gives our lawyers something to cite. It gives people on the ground a reference when states show up with their like fancy words, with uh, their model or for a new law on traditional lands or indigenous lands or a new law on indigenous peoples. Like it's gives indigenous peoples on the ground something that they can use. But it also, what it does, it shifts the burden. It shifts the burden of proof because states now have to explain why they disagree with the court, why they disagree with the question, not us explaining why we deserve rights, them explaining why they are ignoring the court. And that is what we need. That is exactly what we need: a shift of the burden of proof. Now, bringing it back again to the permanent form at hand, the ICJ cannot act on its own, right? It only issues opinions if the General Assembly asks or Security Council, and in this case, the General Assembly would be like the track. States have to propose a resolution, states have to vote, and before any of that happens, there needs to be pressure, a signal from indigenous peoples that this is what we want. And the permanent forum can be where that signal starts. If the permanent forum includes a recommendation in its report calling for an ICJ advisory opinion, that is a signal. It goes into the report, it gets referenced in negotiations, it becomes part of the record, and that is something that's certain, or like hopefully all member states will take back to capital and say like, hey, this is what the permanent forum says in this report. What do we do with it? And obviously, like an inclusion in the permanent forum report does not guarantee the outcome, um, but it does create momentum. And in this game of international diplomacy, multilateralism, momentum is everything. So if you are going to the permanent forum, I am asking you, I'm asking you directly, support this. Bring it up in your meeting, in your caucus. Mention it in your interventions. Talk about it in side events, over coffee, in the hallway, in the bathroom. I do not care. This is not a solo thing. This is not a my thing. This is a thing for the movement. But the thing is, what movement needs for this, or like what this, if we want to create a movement around this, it starts with awareness. And then again, awareness starts with you deciding that this matters. Now, the final lie, which is lie number 5. And this is the most painful one. Lie number 5 is we do not have the power to make this happen. And this gets me. This really gets me because I've seen what indigenous peoples can do is being at the right moment, at the right time. Sorry, to rephrase that. At the right place, at the right time, with the right language, with the right people. But time and time again, I hear this. We do not have the power to make this happen. And this hurts because if I hear time and time again, it could probably be like the voice in the back of many in these leaders' head when they show up to the forum or any other UN meeting, hoping that their moral argument will be enough. That 3 minutes or 2.5 minutes will be enough for like UN peacekeepers to show up at the doorstep the next day. But that is not how you get outcomes. I'm sorry, it's just not. Here's what you need to understand. The climate advisory opinion did not come from the big powers. It came from Vanuatu. Again, I'm not gonna like state like the why Vanuatu is small because it's not. It's like David versus Goliath. Vanuatu knowing actually like and being that this fearless country, they had a legal argument and they were willing to build a coalition that actually said everyone has a place in this. And by that, they won. So when someone tells you that we as indigenous peoples do not have the power, I want you to remember Vanuatu. So let me walk you through the whole thing again because I want you to see it. I want you to understand that this is not like pixie dust magic. It is not impossible. It is not impossible. But what it actually is, it is a process, steps, things you can actually do. The advisory opinion has to come from the General Assembly. States propose it, states vote. Champion state drafts a resolution. Resolution goes to the GA. States negotiate the text. Question matters, framing matters, comma placement matters as well. Then the GA votes. If it passes, request goes to the ICJ. Then the court opens proceedings, written statements, oral hearings, court deliberates, issues an opinion. And also, what would be interesting, and that's what I would be actually hoping for, or not hoping for, hope is not a strategy, work towards, is that indigenous peoples have, in some ways, a standing at these hearings. So that's what I'll have to figure out. So like the thing is like we cannot talk about indigenous rights with still like member states talk to each other, but actually also allowing for indigenous peoples, to address the court. Is it fast? Absolutely not. The climate opinion took several years, but the thing is the campaign. The campaign is where the politics happen. And this is where we come in, this is where the movement comes in, and this is where you come in. States respond to pressure. States respond to visibility. And states respond when they see indigenous peoples from several regions, particularly from the global south, unified behind one clear ask. Again, I'm not gonna like explain like how Vanuatu did it, but just know that they did not wait for permission. They created permission. They created the mandate. They did not wait for like the big powers to give them a thumbs up. They just started and then they built. They found states. They talk about it everywhere, like literally everywhere. Drafted language, held consultations, built a core group, expanded outwards, ring by ring. And by the time it hit the floor at the GA, it was not Vanuatu asking for a favor. It was a coalition so strong the resolution passed by consensus. And we can do the same thing. Literally, we can do the same thing. Same tools, same access, same pathways. The only question is whether we use them. So if you are going to the permanent forum, consider supporting the recommendation for an ICJ advisory opinion. Bring it up wherever you can, interventions, talk about it at dinner. Identify states. You don't have to approach them, but identify them that might champion this. States with strong domestic indigenous rights, states looking for leadership opportunities, states that will want to matter. And again, diplomacy is all about relationships, and not just with other indigenous delegations, but with state delegations, with the people actually that will sit at the table negotiating this. The people who, yeah, will be in the room when it comes down to. And the thing is also, like, again, like, side note again, we can definitely have a conversation about, well, then Indigenous people should also be in the negotiating room. There should be consultations that include Indigenous peoples. Like, yeah, there might be something to be argued, something that we can work towards. But the bigger picture is that first get this ICJ advisory opinion recommendation into the report. Now, if you're not going to the PEM forum, fair enough, or you're watching this or listening to this podcast after PEM forum ended, please consider sharing this video, because every Indigenous leader who's attending or has attended needs to see this before they get on the plane, or when they get to the expert mechanism, for example, in July, because this is an ongoing campaign anyway. Talk about it in your networks. Make it part of the conversation. Make it normal to talk about this. Read up on this and ICJ process. Like, I've read up on it. I've been asking around and ask, like, not scholars, but experts that have been to the ICJ on the climate change AO or other AOs, or yes, and we're part of the International Law Commission. Yeah, so, like, do not trust on what I say, but do your own research. But that's what you always should do, right? And particularly in this day and age. And also, if you're interested in all this, like, you can connect with me. If you have relationship with state delegations, if you have ideas, if you want to be part of building this, I'm here. I'm open. Yeah, I don't want to say reach out. I'm saying like this. I'm just holding out my hand, and I'm willing to, like, have a conversation with you one on one on this, because this is not one person. This is not a brainchild of my traditional council. It is something that could serve Indigenous peoples across the board. And what we're trying to do here amongst Indigenous peoples is create a coalition, an alliance, not like in a formal sense, but more in terms of like a movement. And movements do not build themselves. Someone has to start, and someone has to name the target, and someone has to make the case. And that's what I'm doing with this podcast. The question is whether you want this, whether you want in on this. 2029, but definitely like within the next 2 to 3 years. Let's say that the ICJ has just delivered its advisory opinion on Indigenous rights, and the opinion is clear. Collective right to self-determination is not a slogan. It is a legal right. FPIC is not optional. It is a requirement, and this is how it needs to be applied in the age of data or traditional knowledge or marine genetic resources or genetic resources. Land rights are not aspirational. They are duties. Now, every Indigenous peoples, their communities has a document to point to, every single one. Every national court or uh, not national court, but a litigator or attorney has a reference. Every state that ever said the declaration was just a declaration has to explain why the ICJ disagrees. And this is the future that I'm working towards. So let me be clear, this will not happen automatically. It will not happen fast. It will not happen without a fight, but it can happen. The climate movement proved it. SIDS or PSIDS showed it is possible, and we watched them do it. We actually watched them do it, and we can definitely learn from like to stand on our shoulders in a way, learn from what worked, and also ask advice for what didn't work and how we can circumvent those problems. Apologies for this long-winded conversation, but I thank you for consuming this podcast. Um, and look, final thing is, I just want to say this. This was a big deal for me. Like writing this down, scripting this, um, applying lessons from 20 years behind the scenes, um, having experienced that a lot of things happen behind closed doors. But with this, I want to be like radically transparent. So that is why I'm putting this out there, just out there. If you made it this far, please let me know. Drop it in the comments, send me a text message, whatever. I really genuinely appreciate you for making it this far. Obviously, I would love to hear what you think, what hit, what did not hit, what I got wrong, what I missed. I would all like appreciate that. So if you can drop a comment, let me know. And yeah, if you're watching this right before we get to the forum, I see you at the forum. And yeah, let's sit down and I'll have a cup of coffee. I don't drink coffee, by the way. Chai latte. Chai latte is my thing. And I'll buy you a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. My friends, I hope you enjoyed this. Please consider to subscribe, to comment, and to share this video on your socials.
My friends, I hope you enjoyed this. Please consider to subscribe, to comment, and to share this video on your socials.